Now behind the magic wand hides another tool which can be useful in making selections. So hold the mouse for a second, release, and go for what's called the quick selection tool. Now the quick selection tool, as you might guess from the name, helps you to make selections in a kind of quick way. Not as quick as the magic wand, but it can be a lot better in terms of output. So what I will try to do is make a copy of this pot here with the flowers, with the leaves, to just add like a third one there, or I could take it and place it there, for example. Now, if I start by zooming in, you can see that it's not a very straightforward selection because the edges are a bit blurred. So what I'm going to try and do here is start with a quick selection tool. Now, up here in the options panel, you can see that you've got the plus sign, which adds to a selection, the minus that subtracts, and the normal one, which creates a new selection. Now, before I start with my new selection, I want to try and educate my tool a little bit. So with the plus sign, I'm going to click in some of the areas where I wanted to understand it's the kind of stuff I will be selecting. Then with the minus sign, I'm going to click in some of the areas where I want it to understand it's the kind of stuff I don't want to include in my selection. And now I'm going to start my selection by drawing around, and the good thing is I can release my mouse now. So right now I have released my selection, but when I click again it keeps adding. So I'm going to keep clicking in the areas that I want to add. So it's a matter of clicking and releasing, and not so much about being good with my freehand drawing with the tool. Now when I get to the edges, if my brush is too thick, one way to change the thickness is from here. You see the size, I can control it with these buttons, but a much quicker way is to do it from the keyboard. So at the top of your keyboard, on the right side, next to the return button, you've got a set of square brackets. Now the square bracket that is the right one, every time you click it, makes your brush bigger. The square bracket that is on the left, which is the one next to the letter P on the keyboard, is the one that makes your brush smaller. So with my square brackets, I can easily tweak the size of my brush so that I don't spend too much time with a small brush when I need a bigger one, but also I can tweak it so I go and work on details. So as you can see, it's not perfect. Like right now I've got a problem here. Let's just finish roughly the selection. Okay, let's say this is it more or less. Now I want to remove that, so again, going to the plus, okay, let's say that I am okay with the selection, which is obviously not perfect, but I've got more options here. I've got this option which is about refining the edge of my selection. So clicking refine edge, what happens is momentarily now your selection is isolated and you can change how it looks. So if it made sense to have it on a black background because you could work better, you could do that. So sometimes, depending on the color that you have to isolate, it might work better on black or on white. I'm going to leave it for white now. And as you can see, you still have your brush, still with your square brackets you can change its size, but what is interesting to see now is I'm going to try and just brush around this part here that I want to refine, give it a few moments, and you see how it's trying to do a better job. I could never have done that freehand. So it's smoothing out some of the edges, trying to make a better job at selecting. Okay, so I'm not going to now spend the time to do the entire plant all the way around, but you can kind of get an understanding of how I brush around and it kind of changes the way things have been selected. So another thing to note, at the moment my output will be to a selection, so this means that whatever I have refined, all the stuff I see right now, once I click OK, will be kept as a selection, and we will return to this later to see what other options we've got. Click OK. So now you see I've got my selection. Let's zoom out, Command 0 to fit everything on the screen. So now I am on the background layer, so if I copy, I am copying whatever is selected, and then paste. I cannot see anything yet because it's been pasted right on top of my selection. It is this layer, layer 4. I'm clicking the Move tool, and now I've got one more pot with a plant. Obviously I'm missing the shadow, so I could have done a better job there refining my selection to add a little bit of a shadow, but as a first step it's a much better job than what I could have done if I was just using my other options. There is a way to add a shadow artificially. It's not the best, but it can sometimes solve easy problems. So layer, layer style, drop shadow. So as you can see now, I have a shadow. I can change its direction. So I'm going to bring it on that side. I can tweak the distance. Okay. I can tweak the spread of the shadow, so how thick it's going to be. I can change the size, so meaning it's going to be with not such a hard edge, which is usually a good idea. To do that, you don't want a very defined shadow. And also, and that's also quite handy, I can change the opacity. So if you don't want a very hard shadow, which you usually don't, you can tweak that. So maybe a little bit more, but a little less opacity. So you can play around with those properties here, and once you're happy, clicking OK, now you see you've got a layer which also has got an effect, a drop shadow. So if you don't want the drop shadow, it's quite simple. You just click the eye and you remove it, and if you want it again, you click the eye and it appears. Command 0 to fit it in my screen.